In response to a student's question, he asks if epsilon brain waves can be used as therapy and if NLS bioresonance devices can detect epsilon brain waves. To begin with, I am going to show what this article says about epsilon brain waves. He mentions that these oscillations, ultra-low frequencies, usually occur at less than 0.5 Hz and range between 0.5 Hz and 4 Hz. The article mentions where and when these epsilon waves are produced and says that research mentions deep meditative states and certain stages of sleep. And he mentions the possibility that it has profound implications for the consolidation of unlearning. And then he mentions the most intriguing aspects of the epsilon wave is its possible connection to deep meditative states and spiritual experiences. After describing in summary what this article mentions, I will show the origin of the concept of epsilon waves. On the US government website of the US National Library of Medicine, there is an interesting article on epsilon waves, a review of historical aspects. The origin of the concept appeared in the 70s by Dr. Fontaine, and he opted and selected the word epsilon because it comes from the Greek letter E, as suggested by the electrocardiography study where the letter delta wave, is designated for ventricular pre-excitation. That is, after the Greek letter D comes the E, and with the E was designated the waves that occur after the delta wave, comes the wave V and called it epsilon. Dr. Fontaine discovered and named epsilon waves. And with this letter it represents a stage between pre-arousal and post-arousal of the heart. What Dr. Fontaine discovered, it is possible to see in the conclusion, epsilon waves belong to the spectrum of depolarization anomaly characteristic of Ca. And what is AC? Ca is a cardiac pathology. It is called arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy and it is designated in abbreviated form with the letter C and with the letter A. I repeat, arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, and as you can see in the image in the arrow, it occurs when the epsilon wave occurs, and it occurs and then. Disappears, that is, there is a pre and post interruption, that is, it is a characteristic of a cardiac pathology that occurs, appears and disappears, that is, it is not that the epsilon wave is present permanently, and when I say it appears and disappears, it is because it represents delayed potentials. Here is the In other words, retarded persons resulting from intraventricular conduction, that is, there is a delay, that is, there is a pause in cardiac activity. In the World Health Organization database, the concept epsilon wave does not appear either, nor does it appear when searching for it in English, but if we only put the word epsilon, we will see that it appears in multiple definitions, but of another concept, epsilon globulin. You can see here epsilon proteobacteria is. That is to say, the concept epsilon appears but associated with other definitions. It is possible to find the concept of the epsilon state, on different pages on the internet that mention the relationship that this concept has with spiritual concepts. As an example, here they mention that the frequency 0.5 says an epsilon state of advanced meditation and high levels of inspiration, but it appears in some. I found the concept on some websites, but not in scientific publications. I did not manage to find this concept as an epsilon state associated with meditation in any publication related to scientific research in the area of spirituality. Here, as an example, another website. Here is the website and it says epsilon state, advanced meditation and 0.5 Hz. So the question, can we use 0.5 Hz? Here they call it the epsilon state at 0.5 Hz. The Metatron device can measure 0.5 Hz and it is possible to do therapy with the Metatron device at 0.5 Hz. I will answer this question. Here we have the Metatron software and notice that in the horizontal bar the axis where it corresponds to Hz, 1.8 and up to 8.2 is presented. The entire Metatron software database is in Hz but from 1.8 to 8.2. Where 1.8 corresponds to the bones and 8.2 to the neocortex, therefore the Metatron software does not have the ability to represent in the graph a measurement of these waves because the probe 0.5 Hz is outside this range of epsilon waves, that is, if there is a frequency of 0.5 Hz, cannot be represented in this graph because it starts from 1.8 to 8.2 and the graph does not have within its design to consider the frequency 0.5. But in the field of health, responding to epsilon waves, which corresponds to cardiomyodystrophy. Indeed, this pathology is recorded in the Metatron software. What does this mean? That we have the electromagnetic record of the pathology and this pathology has this electromagnetic characteristic, and one of the characteristics of this pathology is that in the electroencephalogram it is possible to detect in 0.5 Hz what the epsilon waves are, therefore it cannot, even though it cannot. It can measure and represent 0.5 Hz if it can, and the description of the pathology that is characterized by the presence of epsilon waves appears as we saw in some websites of the type of spiritual knowledge that mentioned that the frequency 0.5 Hz had a characteristic related to meditation. I searched the database of the Ministry of Health and the website of the US government. I managed to find a publication where it is mentioned that the frequency 0.5 but applied in what way with transcranial magnetic stimulation has a therapeutic effect, for example for Parkinson's as well. that the response is effective, the frequency of 0.5 Hz if it has a therapeutic effect, in this case registered in health in the area of health, registered, but applied in this case with the therapy of transcranial magnetic stimulation of 0.5 Hz, is an aid for the Parkinson. In this research he says that two frequencies were compared, 0.5 Hz and 10 Hz, and in the conclusion he mentions that transcranial magnetic stimulation of low and high frequency applied to the primary motor cortex produces significant changes. That is the important thing, that is, there is a benefit, the effects on cortical excitability were opposed to the previous observations, and at the end as a conclusion he says that he mentions as a conclusion, and here is the relevant conclusion, says high-frequency transcranial magnetic stimulation refers to 10 Hz, reduces stiffness and bradykinesia in the upper limb contralateral 2. Stimulation, i.e. it has an effect of reducing stiffness in Parkinson's, and low-frequency stimulation, i.e. 0.5 Hz. Low-frequency application reduced upper limb stiffness bilaterally and improved gait. In other words, the application of 0.5 Hz in a person with Parkinson's improved gait. Therefore, the question, can the Metatron equipment represent epsilon waves at 0.5 Hz? Cannot. But it can measure, it has the record of cardiac pathologies that manifest themselves with that range, with 0.5 Hz, yes, it has the etalon of cardiac pathology. The frequency of 0.5 Hz has therapeutic effectiveness with evidence in the databases of the health authority. Yes, it has evidence in this case, such as the improvement in the gait of people with Parkinson's. And if you search with more time and calm in the database of scientific publications, it is possible to find more applications for the 0.5 Hz frequency. As you can see, transcranial magnetic stimulation has a therapeutic effect in what it is in patients with ischemic stroke, and in this research says that in ischemic stroke low frequency, referred to as 0.5 Hz, is better than high frequency for improving neurological and motor function. And here we have another research, that is transcranial magnetic stimulation, it has a benefit for cerebral palsy. Here I want to highlight this research that says here 0.5 Hz for 20 minutes. Notice, 0.5 Hz applied for 20 minutes has a therapeutic effect for epilepsy, i.e., Parkinson's, ischemia, epilepsy. And here now I'm going to show you where this publication comes from, is from some scientists in China. Here I'm going to open the portal and I'm going to show it to you. It's a publication made in China, and now I'm going to show you with the translation so that it can be may see effects of transcranial magnetic stimulation on motor function in children with cerebral palsy and epilepsy. Therefore, the frequency 0.5 Hz does have a therapeutic effect measured in pathologies and documented with research that is published in the databases of the health authority. Yes, I also have to point out that on some pages that are not considered scientific evidence for the health authorities, but if there are pages like podadiluniverso.com where I am going to place Ctrl F when they want to search for something, they put Ctrl F, we put epsilon, and now we go directly and it says that the frequency 0.5 is an epsilon state for advanced meditation and high levels of inspiration, so it is indeed mentioned by web pages that I can't hear, and I'm not an expert on the subject either. I'm just answering the question in relation to whether the Metatron device can measure the frequency. .5 Hz, and if this frequency can be used for therapy, but I am not an expert in the epsilon state, and I do not know if there are scientific publications related to the epsilon state and high levels of inspiration. I want to emphasize that in the RI frequency software with which we perform therapy, we have the possibility of selecting 0.5 Hz and applying the 0.5 Hz frequency, but applied with sound, and observe here the began to run, and therefore the 0.5 frequency is being applied. Hertz, that is, we can perform complementary therapies by applying the frequency 0.5 Hz. It should also be noted that we have the transcranial magnetic stimulation device. We work with this model, and this model allows us to do therapy also for epilepsy, for cerebral palsy, and also for Parkinson's. Here we have Parkinson's disease. Finally, I invite you to see my biophilia-nls.org page, and you will be able to find courses on the Metatron device in several languages, courses on the Biophilia Tracker device also in several languages, but also millimeter wave courses and transcranial magnetic stimulation courses.